in Southern California. Those issues have resulted in a number of reports that we've issued, ranging from homelessness to the digital divide to the Black experience here in LA. Today, we're presenting a survey that we did in partnership with the Center for the Study of Los Angeles at LMU to understand the attitudes and the expectations that the voters have for the next mayor and for the next supervisor. Joining us today is Dr. Fernando Guerra, who is director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles at LMU, and his colleague, Bree Gilbert. Also joining us is Pete White, executive director of LA CAN, and an advisor to the Committee for Greater LA. We also have with us a member of the committee, Sarah Dussault, and a colleague, Efrain Escobedo, who's VP of Education and Immigration at the California Community Foundation. Together, we will be talking about the findings of this report. Please remember, if you have any questions, please post those on the chat or in the Q&A function that's before you. There was also an LA Times story on the poll, and that LA Times link has been also put on the chat. So with that, why don't we go ahead and start with Dr. Guerra.
Thank you, Miguel. Pleasure to be here. Just a few comments about the survey itself. This is a survey of actual voters that participated in the election this November 8th. As we all know, there are 4 million people in Los Angeles. About 800,000 of those are under 18. That leaves 3.2 million adults. Of those, 2.2 million are registered, and of those, 925,000 voted for mayor in this past election. By the way, that is a record. That is the highest number of people who have voted in an LA election in history. Karen Bass has the record for the most votes ever received in absolute terms. Also, the turnout that we had was the second highest turnout in the past 50 years. Angelenos spoke this past election. We also wanted to understand and give them greater voice with this survey that we undertook. And in that survey, we asked quite a few questions about homelessness, housing, and why they supported the Measure ULA. If we could share the screen, we can take a look at some of those surveys. Again, we surveyed 1,300 individuals. Go to the next screen, please. Next slide. Next slide. And I'm sorry, go back one. Just to finish the methodology, as people were voting and submitting their ballots, we got a list of the individuals who had done that. We would randomly select those individuals beginning on October 20th and continuing to November 8th. So these are, again, actual voters. We did it online and web and text to web and also by phone. And we did it in English, Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. Again, thank you to the California Community Foundation, the Weingart Foundation, and the Committee for Greater LA. Next slide. In a sense, we asked what if your mayoral candidate would effectively represent your position with homelessness. 84% said they did. And by the way, all of the data that we're going to give you was of obviously people who voted both for Karen Bass and Rick Caruso. And there's very little difference between the respondents, whether they chose one or the other. And most of the times it's within 2 or 3 percentage points. So if you're thinking, was that Caruso voters or Bass voters? No, it was both combined and they were very close to each other. Next slide. Here we ask, do you agree with some of the following statements? And the most important one to me here is that homelessness is an issue in the neighborhood I live in. That means that people are relating to it, understand it, and you could answer that whether you're stepping out of your house and there's homelessness right on the sidewalk or when you're driving from your home and you see things that are happening. So let's go to the one other thing that I want to mention here is that the Garcetti administration, 53% still felt that they were doing an effective job. You know, for the last 9 years and every type of polling we've done for Mayor Garcetti, he's been very positive and people continue to be positive and they have a sense that he has been trying, but obviously not enough has been done. And we're going to see that in the following slides. Next slide. How important is it that LA County and the city of Los Angeles work together? In a sense, this is a giveaway question. We knew we were going to get a high number. 96% is a very high number. But again, it shows you that Angelenos want government to work and they want government to work together. Next slide. Were you aware that the following would take place if Measure ULA passed? For most of us, when we vote on a measure, it is quite a few, sometimes 15, 20, 50 pages of text in terms of what you're voting for. And there's a lot in there. And we went through some of the aspects of what was in it. And if people were aware, I am actually very impressed how aware people were of this. The number one thing that they weren't aware of is that it has very few fundings for mental health services, which of course is part of the county responsibility. Next slide. Knowing what you know, how would you vote for Measure ULA? It's almost the same. 60% of the people would still vote for Measure LA. Many of us were informed before the election. In this survey, we actually informed the respondents quite a bit about Measure ULA, and they were still effectively supported. We informed them about the positives and the negatives, and nonetheless, Angelenos continue to support funding efforts to fight homelessness. Next slide. If voters approve Measure ULA, what effect do you expect it to have on homelessness? And here's the optimism from my perspective. They expect that with this money, with the new mayor and everything else that they have done here in Los Angeles, that a majority of us expect that homelessness will decline. Notice we didn't say eradicate it, but decline. But nonetheless, there's still some work to do. But over 50% of us have these expectations. Next slide. What would you support repealing Measure ULA if it failed to effectively address homelessness? What's incredible here is even if we didn't do it in 2 years, people are still about investing in the solutions and investing in fighting homelessness, that you still had 50%. In other words, 60% of us voted for this, 60% of us continues to support it even more, the more we know. And even if it doesn't work within the 2 years, 50% of us still want to give it a chance and know that we need to fight homelessness. Next slide. If the next mayor of Los Angeles fails to effectively address homelessness within their first 2 years, would you support a recall? But, there is limit to our expectations. This number was a little bit higher than I expected it to be. And it is a shot across the bow saying, this is the issue we want you to focus on, that we would even consider doing a recall if this doesn't get addressed. Next slide. Would you help who should be held accountable for addressing homelessness? Here we gave the respondents quite a few responsibilities, and of course, it's the mayor. From our perspective, it's every one of these individuals, and they all have to work cooperatively. But when we say single out who, it's the mayor of Los Angeles, the chief executive of the city. Next slide. We then put it down to just two individuals, the mayor and the board of supervisors. Obviously, the board of supervisors have a very important role. Some would say even more important than the mayor. However, Angelenos voting in this election feel that 62% of them feel it falls on the mayor. Again, it is the chief executive that we're looking at. Even though he or she may not have all executive power, we expect her to round up that effort and to be the leader in this fight. Next. Do you agree or disagree that the next mayor needs to reduce the population experienced homeless by 50% within 4 years? Obviously, over 89% feel that way. And again, it falls on the mayor. That you see this strong narrative about the need for the mayor to be proactive. Next slide. Do you agree or disagree with the following statements? This, to me, shows that Angelenos are saying, hey, the government's going to do its part. We need others to do their part. The bureaucratic process needs to be streamlined. Local government has to figure out and work with the mayor in terms of how to solve homelessness. And even to the point where many of us believe that she declare a state of emergency. And importantly, 2/3 of us feel that environmental restrictions have to be to forego to some extent. And then can the oversight that might be, in terms of elected officials, we're really talking about the city council. Here is Angelenos are doing their part. They feel that other very large significant interest groups, such as the unions, the environmentalists, and local community activists have to play a role and not just focus on their issue, but the overall issue. And this is a very strong indication that Angelenos want everybody to put their interests aside and be laser focused on solving homelessness. Next. To address the housing shortage in LA, would you be willing to do the following? Not only are Angelenos providing the money, new leadership, look at what they're willing to do. 71% say they are willing to have new apartments near their home. 66% shelters within a mile of their home. 50% are willing to consider building additional ADU, or if you want to call them granny flats or casitas, or even garage conversions on their homes to solve this problem. And even 40% are thinking about building, or renting a room in their house to address the issue of housing and homelessness. This is that Angelenos haven't just stopped at the voting booth. They're willing to go beyond that. Next. And in the last 12 months, did you have trouble paying rent? Here, we only obviously asked the renters, and 56% of them had trouble paying rent. So this tells us that this problem of homelessness and potential homelessness will not go away. And remember, this was a select group. This was a survey of the randomly selected from the 925,000 that actually voted. There's still something like 1,250,000 other adults in Los Angeles who didn't participate in this survey, and they are more likely to be rentals. So we expect this number could be even higher than that. Next, I think it's the last one here. Yes, and we'll leave this up here. A lot of data, a lot of crosstabs, a lot of information here. We'll have this available for you, but I'm going to turn it over right now to back to Miguel to continue the conversation. Thanks.
So joining us is Pete White. Pete.
You would think that after 2 years, I would be able to find that unmute button, but here I am. Thank you, Miguel, and thank you, Dr. Fernando. I think my job here today is to really talk about how this data lives in community today, right? How this data has been showing up in Skid Row and in Venice and in Koreatown and all across the city. And so my name is Pete White, the Los Angeles Community Action Network. We're based in Skid Row, right? Skid Row, which was historically the place where you thought all houselessness existed, right? But now with this data, and over the last few years, we know that that is not the case. I think one of the most important things that the data breathes life to for us is sort of the inflow problem with houselessness in LA City and LA County. LA CAN is part of a consortium called Stay House. And this is a network of organizations across Los Angeles City and County, from the West Side to Mid-City to the East Side to South Central Los Angeles, whose major charge is to make sure folks stay housed, right? And so we've been together since August 2020, and we've made 1.7 unique contacts with people in Los Angeles County who are concerned about their ability to stay in their homes, right? Of that 1.7 million contacts, we've connected tenant navigation services to about 30,000 individuals, right? And this is, mind you, this is throughout COVID, throughout the pandemic. And the majority of the calls that we've received in all of these organizations from all across the city have been called around: one, folks can't pay their rent; two, illegal eviction and rent-controlled apartments; and three, the expiration of tenant protections, right? And so what we're hearing, I feel, what we're hearing in the survey is people's proximity to houselessness has shifted, right? Years ago, when we were talking about H and triple H, it was seen more as a charitable thing that Angelenos would do because Angelenos are great, right? And so we were like, charity can help us out of sort of this houselessness crisis. Now, what I believe and what we believe the poll is saying is that houselessness is in every corner. Houselessness is in, or the potential to become houseless is in many more households than previously ever imagined. And what people are saying now that this is a political issue, that we don't have time to wait, that we are now putting deadlines on elected officials and others in terms of what our expectations of and by when. This is a very excited electorate and an exciting time to do this work. And hopefully with the goals of the Committee for Greater LA and other folks, we can actually move Los Angeles forward to where houselessness was a thing of the past. Until then, the informal settlements continue to crop up in Skid Row. From everywhere from Skid Row to the Palisades to Santa Monica, the informal settlements are setting up. But I feel what we're hearing is that folks have said enough is enough. The duty falls on the shoulders of the mayor. We're also seeing that trust in the elected officials is not as warm and friendly as it has been. And so the view from the streets right now is that there's a lot of need, but people are ready and willing to move Los Angeles to a place where houselessness is a thing of the past. Thanks, Miguel.
Thank you, Pete. Sarah.
Good morning. I think my job here today is to talk a little bit about the optimism reflected in this survey and how that creates a moment for some significant policy change and the potential for bold ideas to take root. You know, we do surveys all the time. I think Committee for Greater LA, we were trying to count the number of surveys prior to this webinar, but there are quite a few. We've done quite a few reports. And these impressions from voters, the numbers, the percentages are quite significant. Even though most of the questions were asked in a positive manner, to have 96% of people say the city and the county should be working together is pretty significant. To show that voters want to see changes in bureaucratic process, that they're willing to see new apartments or new housing within a mile, new shelters within a mile. So all of that reflects that this is a very unique moment in time. And the positivity of voters really needs to be harnessed by our new electeds and by our civic leadership to push for systemic change, to really get at the scale of the issue and really tackle the issue. And I think, you know, you can have great ideas. Bounce around, wonderful ideas bounce around in the policy world all the time, but you've got to have the right moment where voters are ready. And clearly from these surveys results, we see that voters are ready for those big, bold moves to address this challenge. And I just want to stress the positivity of these results. It really, to me, provides some wind beneath our wings as we move forward into 2023.
Thank you, Sarah. Efrain.
Thank you, Miguel, and want to just say thank you to the Committee for Greater LA for your leadership in working with the center and producing this data. I think the practice of having this exit poll post-election survey is important for setting governance agendas in a city and region, as the county is, that can often get lost with a lot of interest or lose focus very quickly after the euphoria of election outcomes winnowed down. So very excited about the findings. And we'll just share a couple of perspectives that I think Pete did an amazing job of giving us the perspective from the streets and sort of how this is playing out and what's actually driving the priority for communities on focusing on both houselessness and our affordability crisis as well. And as Sarah mentioned, the optimism. I think what this survey really helped to underscore, as did the election outcomes, is that voters in the city have done their part. Measure after measure, as Pete mentioned, from H to HHH, before that Measure J, and now with ULA, the voters in the city of LA are putting skin in the game. They're making sacrifices in hopes of finding a solution, mitigating the growing issue that is houselessness and affordability. We saw how many renters are just maybe 1 or 2 missed payments away from being evicted and entering the homelessness pipeline. So we thought we are working with a finite population. I think these findings tell us that there are more people on the fringe and at risk of adding to this crisis. And so when you look at the findings, I think the other thing that's important beyond voter support and their sacrifice and prioritizing of this is that, to your point, Sarah, there's moments. I think the voters in the city of LA have been waiting for moments for several election cycles. What remains to be seen in the ballot outcomes now in this election is, do we now have all of the leadership pieces in place at the county, in the city, both in the mayor's office and also on the legislative branch of the city and the city council, to really take the bold transformative steps that are needed, which the voters have continued to put skin in the game. Now it's time for leadership to do so. And I think these findings, I'm hoping, really put to rest the question of, well, is there political will in the city? Is this really what the voters want? That question has been answered. And so now our attention turns to what is the leadership and what skin is leadership going to put in this game moving forward.
Thank you, Efrain. Now we're going to turn over to the question and answers, and there's a couple of technical questions folks are asking. The first one is, will the results be posted online and available for the public? As the committee has done with all reports can be found on the Committee for Greater LA website, and as well as this survey that was conducted. This presentation and the recording of this webinar will also be posted immediately after the conclusion of the webinar. So you're welcome to go to the Committee for Greater LA website, access the findings directly, and we encourage you to also sign up so that you could be informed of other reports that will be issued. There was a specific question related to a policy matter that the council has been debating and has adopted. Fernando, could you answer the question? It's specifically regarding the ordinance 4118, which is about keeping the unhoused off of sidewalks. Right. The question is, was there a specific question on the survey on that ordinance?
There was not a specific question on that ordinance, number one. Number two, we have asked about encampments in previous surveys, not the specific ordinance, but about the role of encampments, where they should be located, et cetera. And those were surveys of all residents, not just voters. And those could be found on the LMU website, specifically the last 2 annual surveys that we've done, where we do speak and ask about encampments.
Thank you. There's a couple other questions. I'm going to turn the first one to Sarah. How does this survey align with previous reports that the Committee for Greater LA has issued and other data points that have been issued in the last few years on the issue of the unhoused?
So it align in the sense that we see voters are really on the same page as a lot of the recommendations that the Committee for Greater LA has put forward. And that can be found in our No Going Back report and the other reports we've issued on our website. I don't know if we want to bring up that slide, but the slide that talks about the bureaucratic process, I think would be helpful to review one more time. I'm not sure that I've ever seen in polling these kinds of numbers in terms of support for systemic change around how we deliver housing. People want it done faster. People want it done with less bureaucracy. People are willing to see it in their neighborhood. Those are remarkably aligned with the recommendations that the committee has been talking about for a couple of years now. So we have, a as housing scarcity, a vast housing scarcity. And Pete really spoke to the impact of that on the ground. And voters are now clearly aware, and they want to see big changes. And they're willing to give the mayor more authority, and they're willing to look at changes in government that really address this crisis.
Thank you, Sarah. And to add to that, I think there's a question that's related to the point that you made. Did the poll or survey convey any findings around the current governance and design? Well, from my understanding, there wasn't any specific questions on the governance, but as Sarah indicated, there was a clear mandate that voters understand that the only way through ending homelessness is by greater coordination between the city and the county. And that's, as has been pointed out, nearly 100% of everyone said that that's part of the secret sauce to ending homelessness, and also recognizing that there needs to be real leadership, and seeing that the mayor in particular has a unique opportunity to lead. There's
Hey,
this,
Miguel, just for me to say this, it is very clear from the results and very direct that voters understand that the responsibility falls amongst many players, as you saw in one of the set of results, number one, and that number two, these players have to coordinate. Very clear. In terms of voters' perspective, that's enough about governance. It's about us then, who are the elected officials and the civic class that has the specifics. But the voters are very clear that the responsibility is amongst many people, many institutions, and that they have to cooperate.
thank you. I'm going to turn this question over to Pete and to anyone else who would like to answer it. Regarding NIMBYism, we've certainly have heard that a lot in the last few years around the difficulty of convincing voters and residents to accept housing near them. The question is, we often hear about NIMBYism as a roadblock to building housing. This survey tells a different story. Why do you think that is, Pete, and anyone else who wants to add?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Again, I think it's because folks' proximity to the issue has changed, right? I think more Angelenos are either facing houselessness themselves. When we look at the numbers around, 470 of these of the folks surveyed were renters. Nearly 50% and above of those 470 had trouble paying rent in the last year, right? And so in the last 12 months. And so when you think about that, what we're really talking about are folks who are now more afraid than they ever have been, and know someone who could potentially become houseless, right? And so I think the proximity, the electorate's proximity to the issue has lowered some of the barriers. Because now when you're not thinking about those people, right? Those people in Skid Row, those people over there who could potentially become houseless. Now you're thinking about those people as folks who are in your orbit, right? And so this is like houselessness has come home to roost in many neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And what we're seeing now are Angelenos saying, we can do better. We have to do better. We're in this together. I think this is what the survey says.
Efrain, do you want to add to that?
I do, Miguel. Well said, Pete. A couple perspectives to add on the question as well is, I think it's also a function of the effective work of so many community advocates and allied policymakers to decriminalize this issue. Right, for way too long, we were criminalizing and having a narrative of almost broken window type of theories about addressing homelessness in your area. And that effective work, I think, has had to change. The other to remember in this election context is while the entire country had an election that was driven by inflationary and recessionary concerns, LA stood fast on this issue of homelessness. So the other point I think is voters are now realizing we have a real structural problem. This is not a poor people's problem. This is not a people of color's problem. This is a serious structural problem societal problem, and I think voters are starting to realize that.
And Efrain, since you're sharing, what are your assessment as to sort of this unprecedented voter turnout in this election? I know that this is something that CCF follows very closely, engages in a number of efforts to try to bring out voters. What's your general sort of view on why in this particular moment have Angelenos really decided to engage?
I think two reasons, and I'll put it in context. One is, while we may celebrate the phenomenal turnout in the city of LA, we should all be extremely concerned about the deplorable turnout throughout the rest of the county. There are cities where less than 10% of voters voted in this county. But what it does speak to for the city of LA is that voters want a better LA, that we had an election that actually spoke to voters, where the entire election, because we had an organizer on the ballot, became about engaging voters directly, meeting them where they're at, knocking on doors. And that is a testament to what we've all understood and really preached for many years, which is, if you talk to voters, if you engage them, let them know that their votes matter, and you address and talk about issues that are affecting them, they will make this democracy work and drive the city of LA. Unfortunately, amidst what was a contrary point in the rest of the county, I think is really a testament to them in this election.
Thank you, Efrain. There's a question around just trying to understand the context of the question related to renters feeling housing insecure. Fernando, can you talk more about that?
Yes, I mean, these results are incredibly impressive in the following context. Only about 37% of our respondents were renters. Why? We are surveying actual voters. Again, 925,000 of us voted, and we drew our sample from them. That still leaves 2,275,000 Angeleno adults who didn't vote. 2,275,000. That percent, the voters there are over the renters there are over 60%. And so we didn't survey them. Remember, this is just the voters. And so renters are, in a sense, underrepresented, but not as voters. And so these results to me are very impressive, in a sense, progressive. And it wasn't the renters, it was the homeowners who were saying this and willing to tax themselves and willing to do this. Yes, renters have to be a little bit more proactive in terms of registering, et cetera, but we understand the obstacles that exist there.
Thank you. There's a question, Sarah, I'm going to turn over to you on sort of understanding the various commissions that the mayor will need to, start appointing Angelenos to. I know that the committee is working to try to ensure that there's a broad network of folks representing the diversity of the city. Could you talk a little bit about that? And if folks are interested in participating in a commission or engaging in their city government, what advice would you give them?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I hope that people who have previously not thought of themselves as serving on city commissions will put their name forward. Or you can also nominate someone else. You'd have to be a resident of the city of LA, but you could be young, you could be old, you could be undocumented. It doesn't matter there, and your voice actually does matter. I've served on the LAHSA Commission, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority Commission, and these are vital roles for the mayor, where the mayor can bring in insights from people with lived expertise, from people with expertise in particular fields. So part of the issue is putting your name forward. The mayor is not omniscient. She's not going to know you're interested if you don't put your name in. So the Committee for Greater LA has tried to make that easy. We have access on our website, a really simple portal to just fill out some basic information. And I know that the mayor-elect is also planning to open a portal to be able to accept those names. But I think it's critical for all of our various organizations to really be reminding people to put their name in. I think everyone on this panel, I think every community group that might be represented here, you need to put more names forward so that we can have that diverse representation. Latinos are underrepresented on commissions. Black people are underrepresented on commissions. We need those names. We need people to raise their hand in order to get that representation. And then in terms of new leadership, I think this mayor is incredibly energized to bring in diverse voices from all parts of the city. But that's not going to happen if we, the citizens and residents, don't put our name in.
Thank you, Sarah. And certainly, people may think they need a fancy degree to serve on a commission. Your lived experience is many times more important than whatever job description you have or fancy degree. So we encourage you again to go to the Committee for Greater LA website and submit names for potential commissioners. We will be handing those list of names to the next mayor. The last question regarding homeless encampments, did this survey or any other surveys that folks are aware of really give any glimpse about attitudes and expectations on homeless encampment? So I'll first turn it over to Fernando, if you could respond to that, and then anyone else who wants to add.
Yeah, in general, residents of the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles do want to have some of the encampments moved. They're more restrictive than you would think. On the one hand, they're very giving when it comes to money, et cetera, but they do feel that there has to be a greater control in terms of what we call encampments. Again, I'll refer you to our website where all those results are available.
Thank you, Fernando. Well, we're going to be concluding this webinar. I'll just close by saying a few comments. It's not often that government presses the reset button. Not only is there a new mayor that's starting on December 12th, but there's a significant number of new council members who will also be joining the new mayor in helping govern the city, and a new supervisor representing the 3rd district, which 80% of those constituents actually live in the city of Los Angeles. So this is a significant opportunity to really think about and engage in specific actions to reduce homelessness on a systemic level. In addition to that, what is very clear is that there's an unprecedented amount of support from Angelenos and folk in a way that Angelenos are willing to give the next mayor the ability to do whatever she can to solve this issue. And they're willing to forgo expectations around their role in the placement of housing near them and taking into consideration other issues that may be less important than actually housing people. And I think what was this very powerful is that this is an issue that is very close to Angelenos. They see it, they see human suffering every day in their daily lives. And many of them, more than a majority of renters feel proximate to that because they themselves are struggling to survive and make rent. So it's an issue that is very close to Angelenos. So this is an opportunity for all of us to come together to support the new leadership, to do whatever is necessary to end homelessness. And I look forward to, and as well as all of our panelists today, in coming together to identify solutions, to support the next mayor in the hard decisions that she's going to have to make, and to certainly to encourage her to look at this issue systemically and ensure that it gets solved for the long term. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. Again, please go to the Committee for Greater LA website where you can certainly get these survey results and also see a recording of the webinar. Thank you very much, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving. All right, great job, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job, Bree.